Hello, my name is Sean McDermott. I'm a certified financial planner with LPL Financial. I'm here with Rana Gilbert from Janus Labs team from Denver, Colorado. Rana has been invited into the office today to share her expertise in a program called Brainworks, which helps people to manage their mental energy and improve cognitive fitness. Through Janus Labs programs, Janus offers research-based tools to help financial advisors like me in a variety of ways, including health and wellness. As an advisor, I believe it is important that you invest in good financial, physical, and mental health for a happy and full retirement. Research today suggests that age-related cognitive decline, such as reasoning and memory loss, is part of the aging process. But studies show we can prevent or at least postpone its development through intervention. The presentation today is going to focus on maintaining a healthy brain. Let me turn it over to Rana to tell us more about the program. Rana?
Hi, Sean. Thank you. Thanks for having me here to talk about this important topic. So we created this program called Brainworks as an extension of a larger program we have called Energy for Performance. And with Energy for Performance, we partnered with an organization called the Human Performance Institute. And they started their work many years ago working with elite athletes, really to help them improve their productivity, to improve their performance. But what they learned very quickly was there were things that we could apply, lessons we could learn from elite athletes, but apply it to the everyday person in the everyday world. So this particular program really focuses on one aspect, but in Energy for Performance, we really look at productivity in 4 areas, and it's physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, with the idea being that we can train, much like athletes, to improve our performance in all of these areas, to really be elite and to really be productive. But for this program, Brainworks, we're really talking about the mental capacity, cognitive fitness, as you said. And in particular, we're focusing in on an area that we call brain drain.
So what are the causes of brain drain?
So brain drain really is caused by everyday life. And there's 3 primary causes. One is stress, one is aging, and one is multitasking. And as you can imagine, most of us, especially as working professionals, are still doing a lot of multitasking and probably experiencing a lot of stress. And there's not much we can be doing about slowing down the aging process.
I can see where we can have some control over multitasking and stress, but do we have any control over the aging from the aging perspective?
We absolutely do, more than we think. Now, we obviously can't control the fact that we're aging, but one of the things we need to understand first and foremost is that research shows that after the age of 30, we actually start to lose about 10% of our mental capacities, our cognitive fitness, every decade. And that's a pretty scary statistic. But if we think about the fact that we can train our bodies physically to offset some of our aging, we can also train our bodies mentally to offset some of that aging. So that's the good news in all of this. We can't control the aging, but we can certainly train our brain and be intentional about some exercises and things that we can do to get our brain even more strong. So a couple of areas that we can focus on, we know that there are really 5 areas of foundation in order to have a healthy brain. And the first of which is, come back and talk about these in more detail, but the first of which is food, so what we're putting into our bodies. The second is exercise. The third is balancing stress. The fourth is getting enough rest. And then the last one is actually social interaction.
Interesting. Rana, could you give us a few more details about these?
Sure, absolutely. So the first one really focuses on what we eat. So if we think about the fact that food is obviously what fuels us physically, well, it's also what fuels us mentally. And thinking about what we need to do to keep ourselves physically fit, we do need to do a lot of the same things to keep ourselves mentally fit. So really 2 areas to focus on in terms of food. The first is what we're putting in our bodies. And there's a lot of research that talks about healthy brain foods. And typically that's going to be what you might have heard people refer to as the Mediterranean diet. So focusing on whole grains, fruits and vegetables, lean proteins. So really putting the right foods in our body are going to help fuel. And then the second thing is focusing on how much we're eating. And the idea is we want to maintain what we call, really, it's a consistent glucose level. And glucose, all that is energy. And it's energy that you get from your food that you eat. And if you think about days where you might eat too much or eat too little or go too long without eating, if you're really thinking about what impact it has on your brain, you realize it has an important impact on how well you function. If you've got an important meeting coming up, difficult conversation you need to have with somebody, if you haven't eaten in a long time, you're not going to have the concentration that you need. And the reason for that is your brain's not getting the glucose or the energy that it needs, quite simply. So then when you move on to the area of activity, again, I think most of us understand that we need to be physically active to maintain physical fitness, but you need it for the same reasons for your brain. And in its simplest form, what you're trying to do is get oxygen and glucose, energy, to your brain. And you can't do that if you're not moving. So if you think about how you feel when you've been on a long flight, or you've been sitting at your desk for too long, you start to get distracted. You start to lose your ability to concentrate. Well, one way to combat that is simply getting up and moving. So being strategic about your movement, especially when you know there's something important mentally that you need to tackle. So then you move into the area of balanced stress. And this is an area that I know most of us really struggle with, whether we're working professionals, stay-at-home moms, even if we're retired and we've taken on a lot of things in our retirement, balancing stress is so important. And really the basic thing I want to leave you with is this idea that when you're under stress for long periods of time, your body actually creates a chemical called cortisol. And over time, cortisol becomes toxic in your brain, and it actually can literally kill your brain cells. It literally will dumb down your brain. So making sure that if you're getting stress, which we all have stress can actually be good for us, but making sure that we're offsetting some of that stress with what we call recovery. So taking mental breaks, taking physical breaks. If you're somebody who gets energized from your movement, and you've had a stressful maybe conversation with a client, getting up and going for a walk is actually going to be a mental break for you. So finding those breaks as you need to balance your stress. The next area is rest. So most of us don't get enough sleep. And we, again, might understand what impact this has on us physically, but in terms of our mental capacities, sleeping is really when our brain does a lot of its work. And if we're not getting typically the recommendation is going to be 7 to 8 hours of sleep for the average person. And if we're not getting that, or we're not getting quality sleep, we're not getting into what we know as REM sleep, your brain actually isn't having the ability to do the work it needs to do to imprint memories. So making sure that we're getting enough sleep so that our brain can go ahead and do the work it needs to do overnight to help imprint with our memories. And then the final area, which I think is most surprising for people to hear, is about social interaction. And there's a study that actually was done by Harvard that told us that lack of social connections is as bad on somebody's mental health as smoking. It's as bad on your health in general as smoking. So making sure that, especially as we age, it's one thing we see a lot of times in older people who become isolated, and you start to see a connection between the cognitive decline, making sure that we're socially active. It doesn't mean we have to have 100 friends, and it doesn't mean we have to have activities every night, but having at least a handful of very meaningful social interactions are going to help keep our brains healthy.
Interesting. Ron, I've been hearing a lot about brain games and how brain games can make our lives healthier. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure, absolutely. So what I just talked about was really the foundation. So once you get most of that foundation in place, then you're ready to move on to more of a fitness regimen for your brain, if you will. So there are 3 areas in which to focus, and that's strength, flexibility, and endurance. So brain games in particular often fall into this strength category. There are things that we can do to really strengthen our brain, either through brain games, but it can also be through just trying something new, challenging ourselves mentally. If you're somebody who maybe likes to do crossword puzzles, that's great, but once you've sort of mastered that, you want to try a new brain puzzle, even something that's going to make you probably a little uncomfortable and a little frustrated. That's how you're going to actually grow your brain from a strength perspective. So then when we talk about flexibility, what we're really talking about there is really how you see the world in terms of positive and negative emotions. So having the ability to understand the positive lessons that could be learned from a stressful situation, or frankly, just choosing to see life maybe in a more opportunistic perspective than as things that are threats to us. I want to show you a picture, and I'd be curious to get your perspective on this. Take a look at that picture and tell me what your reaction is to that. What are the emotions that you feel when you see that?
A little scary because I'm not one for heights.
Exactly, that makes sense. And ironically, other people look at that picture and feel triumph. They feel joy. They look at that and see, oh, this is somebody getting ready to summit. This is somebody who's getting ready to make it to the top of a hard climb. The point of that is there's no right or wrong, but the way that we choose to see things, the way that we see things in terms of threats versus opportunities can have a big impact on our brain health. So some things that we can do to help train ourselves to think more positively. One example could be a daily gratitude list. So for 30 to 45 days, writing down a few things that we're grateful for. It's amazing how after doing that for 30 to 45 days, you actually can train your brain to think more positively. So I'm going to show you one more. I'm going to put you to test again. I want you to go ahead and take a look at this screen. And what I want you to do is read the word, read the color of the word.
Blue, green, purple, orange, red, purple.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there because that's easy, right? That's the easy one. So you probably know what's coming next. We're going to change this up a little bit, but this is an example of a kind of game that you can play to test your brain. Okay, so now I'm going to have you take a look at this, and I want you to read the color, not the word. Okay, you ready? Go ahead and take a look.
Green, yellow, orange.
I won't make you do the whole thing. You see how much harder that is?
It is.
And the reason for that is we've trained our brains to just see things in one way. And when we have to look at it in another way, it causes us to spend some time having to slow down a little bit. And now if you practice that, you'd be able to read that second slide, frankly, just as quickly as the first. It just takes practice. So this is an example of some of the games that you had asked about earlier that we can play.
I see. Well, this is a great overview and a good reminder of how we can all benefit from exercising our brain. What specific things can you recommend people do to get started?
Sure. Well, I know we have a couple of resources, so maybe you want to talk about the workbook that we have available. So one of the things that in this workbook that we have, really the first place you want to start is in the assessment. So there's a page in there to take an assessment. It's just a couple of pages. It won't take very long. But for people who want to learn more, they can go through and find out what areas they might want to focus on. So once they've done that, we have more resources in this workbook that really give them a lot more detail. So for instance, maybe somebody takes the assessment and they decide that the nutrition area is something they need to focus on. We have a lot more information in the workbook about what are some of the foods they could be eating, how they can get to that eating light, eating often that I talked about, what are some snacks that we recommend. So there's a lot more details. And then finally in the back, we have some suggested places where people can go on the internet, some books that they can read to find some of these games like we talked about here, so they can do some of this practice on their own.
Okay, excellent. Well, this is great. Thank you very much, Rhonda, for coming in today. And we appreciate your listening. Please contact our office if you'd like the Brainworks workbook, and feel free to call us anytime. Hopefully you'll join us for a presentation on energy for performance. And we're going to talk a little bit more about physical health and wellness. Thank you.
Thank you.